Hi, I'm Keith Sinkowski, and I'm the author, artist, and designer of Testament. And today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about poetry or why poetry. Oftentimes, when folks find out that I wrote a book, I published a book, they're like, oh, that's really cool. And sort of, what's it about? And I always begin with, it's a prose poem, blah, 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 right? Um, and I think that that more than anything else is the thing that gets folks to sort of stop and pause for a second here. So how did I land on a prose poem is really sort of the one of the follow-up questions from folks when um, I tell them what I wrote or what I made. Um, and the path there really isn't super straightforward. I think some parts of it are pretty obvious as to the choices that I made along the way, particularly as you read it, you sort of see what I was sort of playing with there in that regard. But outside of that context, why would I do a poem? Poetry isn't necessarily the thing people think about when they think about writing epic fantasy or mythology. Um, but for me, it seemed like a natural choice over time, not necessarily right away, but certainly over time. I think like my sort of obsession with the use of poetry hit actually when I read a translation of the Lay of the Cid. Now, the way I landed on writing a poem, though, wasn't so much like I read the Lay of the Cid, I read the Iliad and the Odyssey, I was exposed to things like Beowulf. I was, reading Shakespeare, and I was just like, oh yes, I absolutely am going to go write a poem. And that's just not where that landed. Um, when I really started, I was writing what I will describe as a awful first person historic narrative. Um, and it was, but the poetry was always sort of in the back of my mind. But as I wrote this thing, and I was really upset with it, I liked the ideas behind it, but I didn't like my execution of it. I think I was struggling to find my voice at the time. I was struggling to find the right way to articulate the things that I was wrestling with. The work is very much a utilization of mythology to explore, you know, my personal fears, my hopes, existential dread, uh, and I think, in a weird way, the fact that part of my career was very much presenting um, slides and PowerPoint of all things to convey ideas. A very similar model on which you communicate when you do poetry, right? There's beats to it when you do it well. You try to get one idea across at a time. It builds upon itself over time, and if done well, it tells a story. And so for me, when I started to deconstruct the work and I wanted to do this thing, but I just wasn't happy with the writing, is that's when I sort of fell onto, well, why can't this be a poem, right? Why can't I write a post poem? I know no one does that anymore. I know that, exploring ideas through poetry, long form poetry. And so, I think for me, that became a natural landing place is I picked iambic pentameter. I chose a non-rhyming verse. I chose not to construct, sextets or anything like that. I wanted to sort of do like a free verse prose poetry that told us a single story, but it's all written to be read aloud and sort of follow the beats, the music of the patterns of the syllables. So that's the long, rambly answer as to why I ended up writing a prose poem. And I could probably talk on for hours and hours, hours about it, but instead I'd like to, leave you with a little bit of the work and maybe you'll understand why I chose this format for what I did. Dreams of the future gone, sweet mercy gone. My mind sat on the precipice, despair. My very soul consumed, horror held me. What had we become in the endless void? Our forebears would have wept on seeing us. At that moment, I thought all had been lost. Then I heard something, words fail to describe. A song of love, hope, redemption. Thank you for your time, and I hope if any of this was interesting to you, you'll check out my book.